Good morning and welcome. If we could have people move forward so the folks in the back could have a seat. Thank you, thank you. This thing on. It's going to be a terrific session. We're really excited about it. We've just got 5 marvelous speakers, and the topic is one that's very important to us in academic radiology, which is how to jumpstart a career in research. As I said, we have 5 speakers. We'll leave some time for questions. We'll start first with Reid Omery, who's going to talk to us about how to choose your research topic, and he's the chair of radiology at Vanderbilt and a true leader in research as well. So put your hands together for Reid Omery.
Thank you, Norm and John, for inviting me to speak today, and thanks everyone for showing up. This is a real pleasure for me. I remember as a second-year radiology resident, I think Alan Matsumoto can speak to, I was an awkward resident. I still am awkward, but I remember my very first presentation was here at the AUR in 1994. And I remember feeling how I was part of a community that was accepting and very focused on developing residents into future faculty. And I fast forward to today, and just about 20 minutes ago, we have a junior faculty member, Lucy Spoluto, and she was wondering how to get involved with patient-centered care, and introduced her to Carolyn Meltzer and to King Lee, and then within 2 minutes, basically, they were there to try and help Lucy jumpstart her career. And I think that really speaks to who we are in the AUR, and that we are all present with this goal of helping our junior faculty and our trainees become successful. And as now a little more senior faculty member, I can speak to how fulfilling that is for me, and how fun, and how it makes me want to get up in the morning and be really proud of what we can accomplish. So in trying to decide how to choose a research career, I wanted to speak based on some experiences that I had when I was a resident. Bruce Hillman was one of my mentors, and he had gotten me involved in technology assessment. When I moved to my own junior faculty positions, Tom Grist and Debbie Ali helped me get involved with interventional MR. What I'm going to share with you today are what I think some of the points that I have learned along the way from my mentors. And in many ways, I am the sum of my mentors, and I think that's how we really should try to focus and help our trainees and junior faculty so that they can be successful. Ultimately, it is a ride, it is a journey. And I am an interventional radiologist, and so I have limited ability to understand complexities. I want to be clear. If there's a blockage, open it up. If there's a tumor, try to kill it, okay? And so what I want to share with you is what I would say is a 3-step plan, and it's about trying to have a simple plan that we all can relate to. It doesn't necessarily ensure the success, but it is something that will allow all of us to understand a concerted approach. And so my first recommendation is, as a junior faculty member or trainee, to hop on the train. And what I mean by that is, wherever you land, if you're a resident, if you're a fellow, if you're a junior faculty member, there will be existing strengths at your institution. It might be in the field that you've chosen. It might be in an offshoot. But fundamentally, everywhere we go, there are very successful research groups. And when you want to jumpstart your career, the first thing you want to do is take a look around, identify those successful groups of individuals. And you know, they're this fast-moving locomotive. Nearly whatever they do leads to success. So your step one, simply hop on that train and be a sponge. Try to learn as much as you can from what makes these groups successful. Learn how they think, how they ask questions, how they write papers, what meetings they target, how they devise their lab groups, they speak and listen to one another. There's so much to learn, and you really want to establish that as a foundation in the beginning of your research career. Now, once you've developed a certain degree of technical expertise, you want to take a look around, and you've been on this train, and the train's been really successful, okay? It's time to take that train and go into a new frontier. Find the uninhabited frontier and try and take what you've learned and take that group that has been on this locomotive and lead it in a new direction. And we can look at the various fields, most broadly speaking, as medicine, engineering, or science. And if you try to focus that train, that new route, to an area that is at the interface between the disciplines, that's usually where you can have the most impact. And the real trick about it is not only will you have the most impact, but it's where the fun is. And step out of your comfort zone. If you're a radiologist, get involved with something that may be a little outside of radiology. And wouldn't it be cool at some point in the future that those other fields actually think of you as one of them, but you're actually a radiologist? So you might be a cardiac imager, and you could be Jeff Carr, and you could have cardiologists actually think that he's a cardiologist, but he's a radiologist. I think that's a fun place to be. So you want to establish your vision for what that future, what that frontier might look like. And this is an aspect of sitting at a whiteboard, sitting with a lot of coffee, talking to a lot of people, and try to really envision what that future might look like, and have fun with the design of that future. Sometimes we'll hear artists think that they're the only ones that have creativity, and that when we're in the field of science, we're all analytical and we're all using just a methodical part of our brain. There is so much creativity and so much opportunity in science. You can have just as much creativity as any artist, but you can have an impact that may benefit patients. So I'd like to then suggest to trainees and junior faculty to focus what that vision looks like. And the more complex it is, remember I'm an interventional radiologist, the complexity doesn't quite fit for me. I try to really focus and take an index card and really fill in the blank. I want to be known for. So as an interventional radiologist, you might choose, I want to be known as the interventional radiologist who incorporates molecular imaging. So you're bridging two fields. You might be a thoracic radiologist. I want to be a thoracic radiologist that brings patient engagement to the field of lung cancer screening. You might be a musculoskeletal radiologist. I want to be a musculoskeletal radiologist that brings a new imaging technique to benefit orthopedic surgeons. Something like that. You can fill that blank in. The third key point is, we've decided to hop on the train, we've learned. Then we've taken the train someplace else. And the third point is to try to run those trains on time. And so what does that mean? Well, fundamentally, we have to deliver a product. It's great to have ideas. It's great to have enthusiasm. We're judged as researchers by our product. And our product, we have a research focus, we strive for an impact, and that product looks like papers, and it looks like, in some cases, grants. You have to understand, if everyone has that objective understanding of what the product is, it gives clarity. It doesn't make things more difficult. It actually makes it easier because you are striving for something that's concrete. So there are several habits that will help in looking at that product, and one is to be accountable. Once again, this isn't a negative thing. This is a positive thing. What could be better than you try to establish a research program? You have the autonomy to do it, and you're accountable. Try to make it successful. Do everything you can to engender the success of that research program. You want to be diverse, and what I mean by that is try to think of your various research projects, the focus that you have, to be the equivalent of an investment portfolio. You'd like to have some investments that you know are guaranteed to be successful. They may be incremental, they may not change how you live your lifestyle, but you know day in and day out you're going to get something out of it. At the same time, you might want to have some investments, like find a little startup company and try to invest money in there. You don't know where that's going to shake out. It may be the next Google. It may be a company that goes under. So you want to have a little bit of risk, high impact, high risk, and have a series of other studies that are more moderate impact, moderate risk, low impact, because that'll allow you to be accountable. Finally, you want to be flexible. Be open to feedback. Listen to your co-investigators. Listen to people outside of your field. They may suggest something to you that you had never considered. And if you're flexible, you then have the ability to be nimble. And when you're nimble, you can target, you can move your train into a slightly different field. And I had originally started in the field of interventional MR as a junior faculty member. And I got involved with some cardiology, and I remember getting a summary statement from NIH where the last statement said, what is an interventional radiologist doing involved with intracoronary drug delivery? And I got this thing, and I was like, how dare somebody tell me? And, you know, I put it away for a week. I came back to it, and I said, you know what? This is a mountain that I would die on, and I gotta think about something else. So I actually decided to move into the field of oncology. That was a wide open space. So that was the concept of being flexible. Now, your time is valuable. That goes without saying, but if you recognize that your time is valuable, you then have to realize you only have so much time that you can devote. And the funny thing about research is devoting time to a low-impact research program takes as long as devoting time to a high impact. So if you're gonna spend time doing research, you might as well try to do good research, because it actually doesn't take any more time. It's like if you spend 2 hours watching a movie that is horrible, you could spend the same amount of time and watch a great movie. It's the same amount of time. You might as well spend time watching a good movie. And I'd like to leave you with this final thought. When you're choosing a career, you don't necessarily, it is research, it doesn't always pan out the way you want it to. So you've got a couple of philosophical approaches. One is just to say that I don't know how it's going to pan out, and I'm just going to see where it takes me. Alternatively, you could say, you know, I think I know where I want to take this. I want to be proactive, and I'm going to go after, and I'm going to try to get it. This way may be successful. I think this way leads to a higher likelihood of success. So try to be proactive. Try to think where you want to go. Try to swim to that new place and make an impact. So thank you for your attention.
So we have time for a few questions. If folks want to go to the microphone, and maybe I'll start with a question for Reed. What about mentors outside of radiology? What do you think about that as a path?
That's a great question, Norm. I think that mentorship is something that if done well, involves more than one mentor. I don't think any one mentor can be the be-all, end-all, as you may get locked into just one way of thinking. And that aspect of going to the interface of disciplines, sort of looking out, going out to the abyss and looking over, you're almost leaving radiology, but you're still on the edge of it. And I think mentors outside of radiology can be really, really helpful.
Great. We will pull up our next talk, and we'll have John Lewin introduce our next speaker.
Great. So this is, as you know, a combined SCARD RRA session, and it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kevin King from USC, who is the president-elect of the RRA, and he'll be talking on early career research. Kevin.
Thank you. So, thank you for having me. I'm supposed to be contributing to hear somebody who is very excited about research but hasn't made it. Which is important because you hear a lot of very accomplished people talking about it, and I think once they've made it, it seems almost inevitable. And when you're on this end, it's like this big mountain, right? You're like, sure, I need to get in a great group, I need to publish a lot. Great, I know what to do, I'm going to be successful, right? And it doesn't feel that way. It feels like there's a lot of obstacles. So a lot of stuff that was mentioned in Dr. Omari's talk, I'm actually going to cover, but maybe from a slightly different aspect. And I was trying to think about what the key elements are, and looking back on my success, the big things seem to be passion. And I think that's really true. I think when you're starting out in research, a lot of people, there's some people that just have, if you're the person that already has your MD, PhD, and you already have tons of publications, you've already had your grant, you don't need me to tell you. You're ahead of me. You can tell me what to do. But for a lot of people, we feel like we've had some success, and you see other people around you that maybe you're doing what you want to do, and a lot of people think, I can't contribute anything. I don't really know what I could do. I haven't published. Why would they want me to do something? And I've had what may be considered a flaw. I've always really, really liked to do research. So I've always gotten involved with other groups that are doing research. And looking back on it, I think that groups, people like to be excited about what they're doing. People like to be in clubs with other people that like what they're doing. And I think research for me has ended up being the exact same thing, that even whether I'm talking to my chair or somebody in a big researcher from another place, the thing that's always made a connection with me and them is that I found something I'm really interested in. And sometimes you have to be flexible. They may not have, this is exactly ABC, what you're interested in, but being flexible is key, but having a passion for what you're doing is a currency. In groups, having somebody come in that's very excited to do something, they know you're committed, I think you actually can bring something to the table. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is, why are you interested in doing research? And there's not one answer. There can be a lot of reasons. Doing it for career advancement, that's part of what you have to do now. Intellectual curiosity, addressing a clinical need. I think some people feel very threatened if, I really like thinking about the question. And I used to hate that. What's your question? What's your question? Because there's this formulaic language you're supposed to get into when you're doing research. But when I graduated or got my diploma from med school, the guy who was giving us our talk said, find something you're interested in, figure out a way to measure it, keep track of it, and then figure out a way to assess what you're doing. And so on a basic level, that's all you're doing. You're trying to figure out, is there a way that you can make something better? Most of us have sat around and said, this is nuts, it doesn't make any sense. But to have a voice, you really want to be able to collect data, write it up, and show that. And it can be a very basic thing, or it can be a very big thing. And be prepared. I think a lot of it does come down to what is it worth to you. I had, I think, a fair amount of success, but some people I think maybe are magically talented and they just can pour it out. But for me, I had to give up a lot of moonlighting. I had to come in at night. I had to figure out something of my own to contribute. And time and passion are kind of two linked things. So if you're not willing to show up and actually help, to actually push stuff along, it's hard to get groups to really want to work with you. And I actually think that a lot of this can seem illogical. So this is James T. Kirk saying good luck, and Spock is saying, Jim, the statistical likelihood our plan will succeed is less than 4.3%, which is about the NIH pay line, right, for a lot of grants. and James T. Kirk saying, it'll work. And then Spock, the logical one is like, okay, fine. But in the event I don't return, and James T. Kirk is still saying, Spock, it'll work, right? And I mean, you still look at a lot of people, we're still submitting stuff to the NIH. You still have a lot of people that are excited about research. And I was talking with Steve Chen, and the thing they brought it up, the thing that's difficult when you're trying to decide if you're going to spend your precious time is at the beginning, like you're the venture capitalist, and there's a very uncertain return, right? Most people that go into research don't make it a career, right? Most people don't. Incredibly, talented people or people like me that have this sort of weird drive, like I'm an alcoholic, I'm a researcher, I have to do this. So I mean, there's insane people, and it's hard to make it in research, particularly in radiology. But if you focus on the enjoyment of it, focus on the process, you can build things in a small scale, and then eventually, if you're persistent, I think that things will work out for you. But I think that if you start out and your first experience is negative, a lot of people think, well, I'm a failure, that didn't work. And I started out kind of like he was saying. My chair and other people thought I was like just very schizoid. I had tons of projects, but it wasn't that I knew I was going to pour myself into all those. I just had the mindset that most projects weren't going to work out. And most of them didn't, but eventually I found one that clicked extremely well. So be prepared, collaborations may not result in opportunities. And if you're feeling discouraged, remember, magnificent success stories are highlighted. Most grants aren't funded. When you go to the RSNA and you see those extremely successful people, there's a lot more people that are out in the audience that didn't get that grant, right? And there's really good work being, this is what I tell myself. A lot of this is sort of like self-help stuff. So it's difficult. So time being important, obviously the earlier you start is very, very helpful. I mean, it's not very helpful to tell you now if you'd gotten an MD, PhD, it'd really help you, but you can try to encourage other people that you're talking to, because as you become a radiologist, you're paid a lot of money, as King Lee pointed out. It's very difficult to find somebody to give you protected time while they're paying you a radiologist salary. So in the end, a lot of people that end up doing research, you end up donating your own time, money, because if you do an MD, PhD, you know that's less time you're going to be making money. I did a KL2 scholar where I had 75% protected research time, and I took a pay cut while I was doing that because I really wanted to do research. But I knew, I think it was a very fair trade because I knew I wanted to do research. I knew I wasn't bringing money into the department. I was an uncertain return at that point. I hadn't really published a lot. And I think a lot of people that make it do end up having to do that. I don't mean that as a discouragement, but I think it is a hard thing. So if you're finding it hard for yourself to do it, I think it is that way for most people that end up making it. I mean, not everybody. I know some people are just very talented, but I think there's a lot of people that just, it takes a lot of work. So for protected time, like residency and fellowship, so we didn't have a T32 program. And when I started out in my program, it wasn't really pushing research, but I knew I wanted to do it. And so I had talks with my program director who said, okay, it would be all right for you to be off half day a week, because she knew I was very passionate about research. She had seen the stuff I was doing. I was already trying to help out with projects that Ron Pishak, who's speaking later, was doing. And so I think they recognized that passion, like I'm not just trying to get time off. And so I had that commodity to bring to the table. They said, okay, we'll let you do it. My fellow residents, I still had to bargain with them. Oh, they said I can have a half day off. It's like, great, you can take Tuesday and I'll take Thursday. So you're covering the service. Second year fellowship, very few people want to do a neuroradiology second year fellowship. But again, a lot of it comes down to if you want to have research, a lot of people will donate their time. Protected time is junior faculty, so that's going to be really dependent on where you are. So where I was at UT Southwestern, Neil Rofsky was, I think, very protective of my time, was going to give me a lot of protected time to do research. For personal and other reasons, I moved to USC, and a lot because of the work I was doing research-wise, but the environment is different there. I have the same amount of protected time as anybody else, a day a week. I still, the benefit I have there is they're letting me apply for stuff, so if I get a radiology grant, they'll let me have the 50% time off, and that's something some programs really won't let you do. Not every place will let you apply for those things, and you need to feel that out when you're taking a job. Obtaining funding from CTSI, that's been critical for me. One person had showed me before that a turning point for a lot of people is getting a K-23. there's a lot of little milestones that you can try to work towards. And if you have a CTSI, that's probably a very good way to work towards is seeing if you can do a KL2. A lot of radiologists don't do it, so they were very receptive at UT Southwestern when I was applying because they never had one doing it. Obviously, so time management, this is a big thing. I'm not very good at time management. Anything you put up this, I've tried to do this, but what it really comes down to for the most part, you have to do this. You have to say what's important, what's not. But the big thing is not letting things get on your plate to begin with, or cutting down what you have. So this is kind of funny. When I started the Health Sciences Technology program at MIT Harvard Med School, they said, okay, we're going to expect you to do at least 20 hours a week, like really 20 hours a week in the lab during your first 2 years of med school. We're not going to give you an extra protected time. You're going to do all the other stuff, but you have to be in the lab. And if you don't think you can do it, and they brought up a chart showing like how much time people spend on hygiene, how much time you spend talking to friends and family. And I'm not really sure if they were kidding. I don't really think they entirely were. But like, you have all of this time during the week, so don't tell us that you don't have time to do this. And I had one friend there that was extremely successful, and when I looked at his leisure reading, it was a scientific journal. The guy really, really loved it. And in a way, you have to get like that. You have to find a passion of something you enjoy in doing it, because if it's a chore, you're not going to do it. But the big thing really comes down to learning to say no, and that's a very, very difficult thing for most people when you're starting out. Telling your division chief, I don't want to be in that committee. I don't want to help you with that review article. I don't want to help you with that textbook. All those are things that maybe you need to do at some point in your career, and obviously that can be a career choice in itself. But like Dr. Omer was saying, so when I was at UT Southwestern, Neil told me not to do any of those beginning things. Because at the point I was at, he said, I want you to write papers and I want you to apply for grants. And in the end, when you're coming up with your NIH BioSketch and you're trying to become an independent investigator, that's going to be it. The other stuff can help if you don't have anything else, but those are really the main things you need to get at. And this is not a simple thing. It's a very difficult thing to tell the people that you're asking to help you out no. But you have to do it. You have to figure out a way to say, this is what I want to do. Most people can't do everything. For the chairs in the department, I'm sure that they know this. A lot of people, maybe some of them know it less than others, but there has to be a give and take. If you're doing an extremely large clinical caseload, maybe it's going to be very hard to do research where you're at. Guidance and resources. So mentorship. That's really what mentorship means for a lot of people, like breaking it down. One is telling you what to do so you're not doing stupid stuff, and the other is getting tied in with people that have money or other resources to do what you want to do. And a lot of times it can seem like luck. Like when I was at Harvard, there were tons of mentors. You could walk into their lab and get added on to great big programs. Even there it can be difficult because you have a lot of money and a lot of research, but you also have a lot of other bright people competing to be involved with those labs. So it's not just that the people at the big programs have everything. There's a lot of people fighting to be involved with the resources there too. So in some ways, when I was at UT Southwestern, before it had a really big push to do research, it was actually very helpful. Because Ron Pishak, who's here, he's a cardiologist, and he's actually part of our radiology department, but he's part of a very big Dallas heart study, so that's like the strength at our institution. And they decided they wanted to start looking at brain health, and nobody in neuroradiology was interested in helping. None of the faculty wanted to get involved. So they had this population-based study where they're obtaining brain MRIs for 2,000 people that were fully cardiovascularly characterized, had genotyping, and nobody wanted to do it. If I was at Harvard, I guarantee you that people would have been fighting for that, and they would have been all over it. And as a junior faculty member, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere near it. I would have been shining their shoes on the way in the door. And so when you're at a smaller institution, I think it's important to think about that. A lot of those places, people are discouraged. They don't think they can do it. So if you're actually motivated to do it, a lot of times you'll be the only person in the room with your skill set. So you have to try to think about what my unique skills are at where I'm at. I think that if you're really interested and you're creative, if you're passionate and you're thinking late at night, how can I do something? Who can I work with? And you're talking to people about their research. Like the CTSI was great because going through it, I found countless other people I could have worked with. A vascular surgeon was very interested in some of the stuff I was doing, using imaging to look at vessel stiffness. I think if you have a passion and you're curious and you're looking at what other people are doing and you're flexible, I really feel like just about any place you can find something you can do research-wise. I feel like a lot of it, though, is just not getting discouraged. I think a lot of people think, I don't have any funds, how can I do this? And to some extent, chairs, chiefs, places that seem cash-strapped, most places do have some funds. But like Dr. Omri said, you have to look at it from their standpoint also as a business investment. You are bringing something to the table. Academic success is a currency at research places, but they have to know that you have a reasonable buyout. You know, if they put in money for you, that you're going to be able to do something for them, but you should feel empowered when you're doing this, that they actually want you to succeed at doing that. So this has been my feeling so far. Dr. Lewin's shaking his head because he has no idea what I'm talking about. But for me, the NIH and major foundations, for me, it's been a very humbling experience. Everybody in this room, I think, has been successful, like wildly successful at times in their lives, and you're used to getting all these great things said about you, and then you get these grant reviews back, like, why is a neuroradiologist doing like hypertension research in the brain? Like, what do you have to do with hypertension? And I'm delusional, so I haven't actually given it up. I'm still hitting my head against the wall. That's just me. That's what I want to do. Resources, what value can I add? I mean, I'll talk briefly. I'm running out of time. I'm out of time. I'll just say I've had very happy time working with the Dallas Heart Study. I got brought into a lot of very accomplished cardiac researchers who have advised me and helped me with a lot of my study design. I think I became a very integral part of our Alzheimer's Disease Center, who was very interested after I'd worked with the Heart Study to figure out ways to look at vascular contributions to dementia. And a lot of it is, I think in the beginning, you have to be willing to work without somebody telling you, oh, we're going to make you first or second author. In the beginning, you have to establish yourself, and it's okay to do work and not be even listed as an author. I know that seems very painful. Eventually, you have to get there, but in the beginning, you might have to work with somebody and help them out before they see you as a resource. And I've heard that time and again from people that have made it, that maybe the first paper they didn't make it, but then they were able to do ancillary studies. Or then they were included in subsequent stuff because maybe that person was a jerk, but everybody else in the group realized your worth, and then they got you to do other stuff. So I'll stop right there. Just the main thing is, it can seem discouraging. I really feel like if you have to do it in your heart and you keep trying, I think most people can make it. But don't be discouraged if your first 10 tries don't work. That's what I tell myself. I haven't stopped yet. Okay, I'm out of time.
What we'll do is we'll invite our speakers up after, if time permits, to have some questions. Early in my career, I wandered the basements at Hopkins and stumbled across a physicist and a physiologist. And it really had a huge impact for me, which was finding highly talented PhDs that wanted to collaborate. We're really fortunate to have our next speaker, Elizabeth Krupinski, who is from the University of Arizona. She's a real leader in medical informatics. She's a professor in the Department of Medical Imaging, as well as psychology and public health, and she's the vice chair for research and education. We look forward to hearing your talk, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how to engage your PhD colleagues. And it's kind of been a theme throughout what the previous two speakers have said, is a lot of what success in research is all about is collaborations. And it's collaborations not only within your department, but outside of your department as well. And this is not just clinical departments, and I think you just kind of emphasized it right there, is you've got to go outside your traditional way of thinking. You can't just think medical imaging these days. So much of funding depends on interdisciplinary research, and that means collaborating outside. That means walking across to main campus sometimes, daunting as it may be, to find those collaborations. There are areas where you wouldn't even think that could really utilize imaging, and you may be the one person that kind of finds that out. Well, it can be a daunting process because a lot of the times, you know, the PhDs are these mad scientists off working. Even when they're in your own department, a lot of the times you've got your clinical folks and you've got your research folks, and they're totally separate, and it's like, oh, there's those guys over there. Yeah, they're in our department, but you know, we don't really talk to them. They're a little off. It can also be daunting because, you know, sometimes PhDs can be PhDs, let's face it. You know, and they'll be talking a whole different language, and they'll be up here, and you're like, uh-huh, yeah, That's imaging, how? And we just talk very different languages. So we got to figure out how to get across that. There's also sort of a misconception, I think, sometimes that PhDs are the ones with all the ideas. And that's just absolutely not true. We're struggling as much as you guys are to get ideas on what to do with research. And this is where the collaboration comes into play so often, is that we each see things in slightly different ways. And that's where the good ideas come from, is one from one side saying, gosh, I wonder if. And some, oh, well, wow, I was wondering the same thing. Maybe we could attack it together. So often, this is a double-edged sword, because so often I have medical students, residents, even faculty members coming and saying, I want to get involved in one of your projects. Okay, well, that's swell. What I tell them is, come back to me with an idea, and then we'll talk about how to formulate that idea and turn it into a project. I'm not a source of projects and ideas, okay? The best ideas are what was already said, those that come from you, that are part of your passion. Me simply giving you a project to work on is not going to get you a research career. It's barely going to get you interested because it's my passion, not yours. So get the ideas on your own. And a lot of times I think, oh, the PhDs, they're never going to have time, they're not going to do this, they're never going to help me. I have done stats for so many peoples and helped in so many projects for the price of a Snickers bar and a cup of coffee. I can count on my CV how many papers I've done with other faculty members that have been unfunded, that have been, we've tried to get funding, but we just do the projects because we like what we're doing and we think it's important. And like I said, I'll run anybody's stats for a Snickers bar almost. So what really works? How do you get to engage with your PhDs? The absolute bottom line, in my opinion, is communication. Is simply go out there and talking to each other. The PhDs, what we're after is the clinical significance for some kind of technological idea. MDs typically are looking for a technological solution to a clinical problem. Well, to me, that, there's got to be a match in there somewhere. But what we're both after in the long run is the exact same thing, to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of patient care. And if we keep that in mind as our ultimate goal and we communicate with each other, I really think that we can end up pulling together, and it really does help in the early stages of your career to realize this, to don't be afraid as a resident to go to the PhDs, to go to other departments and start those collaborations and start that communication early. That gives you those early skills to learn how to engage with each other. So what can you do to help engage PhDs and jumpstart your career and so on? As a resident or as a junior faculty member, to start to rethink clinical challenges and questions as research opportunities. I know a lot of junior faculty members who start out saying, I don't want to do research at all. That's just not me. I'll teach, I'll mentor residents, I'll do my service, but don't ask me to do research, I hate it. And it's like, well, then you get in for, well, why do you hate it? Oh, they've never done it. Because they can't come up with the ideas. Again, back to how do you start? If you simply look at a clinical situation, and if you've ever sat down and said, God, I wish, or I wonder, that's the beginning of a research career, right there. And if you approach it that way, and turn every kind of question that you have, or every I wish, into a potential research opportunity, you're halfway there. Some other things that help: theme brainstorming sessions. Just get together. Don't center on an imaging modality. Don't center on an imaging exam. Think broader. Think neuro. Think metabolic. And bring together all those people, MDs, PhDs, residents, faculty, whatever, who have any interest in, say, metabolic problems. And brainstorm. And somewhere in there, you're going to find that imaging is going to have an application. And simply by talking across these disciplines, you're going to find that you may have a really good research opportunity there. We had a brainstorming session a couple years ago, and it was just kind of a catch-all, and it ended up that some of the transplant people came. And looking at cryo applications and preserving the organs and stuff before they come to imaging, and you wouldn't think imaging would have anything to do with that. But he suddenly asked a question, somebody else had, oh, well, gosh, I think we've seen that. And a really interesting collaboration came out of that. So theme brainstorming sessions, again, where imaging is not the focus, but it can really come out of it. Attend research grand rounds talks. I mean, everybody attends grand rounds, but quite often there's always that one little research one in there, so everybody goes to the clinical ones and they don't go to the research one. And then the research people all go to the research one and they don't go to the clinical one. Go to both of them. Also go to the ones outside your department if you can. So often now, most grand rounds are video streamed at most places. You don't even have to go anymore. You can either just access them online or you can attend while you're in your office. You don't have to go traipsing across campus or whatever. Attend from other departments. If there's, you know, once a month maybe, try to attend another one. I mean, these, you know, we all get bombarded with grand rounds. But if there's a topic that even sounds vaguely related to something you might be interested in from pulmonology or from internal medicine, whatever, attend it. That's the potential opportunity for a collaboration right there. I have found in a lot of departments, just by talking to various people, as well as in ours, that sometimes people don't even know who's in their own department. Again, MDs are over here, the PhDs are over there, hiring goes on. We don't know you, you don't know us. Lightning round introductions. Get together at one of your faculty meetings, and again, invite the residents, invite the junior faculty, and everybody has 2 minutes. 2 minutes, maybe one. Elevator speech. Who are you and what are your main interests? Have people prepared, because it's awful hard to do it in 2 minutes. But that's a really good way to get people to sit there and say what they're interested in, and all of a sudden you're saying, oh my God, there's that PhD, they've been in our department 25 years, and we have the same interests, oh my God. It really works. Match residents and grad students. Little harder to do because a lot of radiology departments may not have grad students, but matching, you talk the same language. Okay, I hate to tell you, but sometimes, you know, I don't talk the same language as the grad students and the residents anymore. But you do, you communicate, you have all the gee whiz gizmos, you know what the future is. Talk to each other. That's where you're really going to start your collaborations. You start talking with the grad students now as a resident, that's where your future NIH grants are going to come from. Is you're going to go back and you're going to say, okay, we had this, you know, little project when we were, you know, trainees. Let's do it now for real. Research retreats are always useful. Industry forums. Bring in industry. Every academic town has some related industry. And in Tucson, we have optics. And optics is huge. We've had a lot of spin-off companies. We've got the Optical Sciences Center. But that brings in all sorts of different industry as well. So develop an industry forum where you can come in and the industry comes in and you talk to them and tell them what you do. The best thing that I found when I started early is to shadow. If you invite your PhDs to simply sit in the clinic and watch you for an afternoon, to me that is the absolute best way to establish a relationship. Because one, quite often, we simply don't have a clue as to what the heck you do. And there are so many opportunities out there that if we simply watch, and that was the best thing that I ever did, was go in and sit with our mammographers, our chest, our skeletal, whatever. How do you make it work? Don't just agree, engage, okay? If somebody's going to ask you to participate in their project, to be on their grant, a lot of times what's offered is, okay, well, I'll put you on for 2 to 5%. No, come back and say, no, I want to be on 10 to 15%. I really want to contribute. You know, we're putting you on our grants, let's face it, because it looks good. And it gets you brownie points when the reviewers say, oh, look, they have the radiologist or the pathologist on board. Good, good job, check, got your points. But from my perspective, doesn't do me any good if I'm giving you 2 to 5% because you're not going to help me. Your schedules are far too complex. Okay, you might, talk to me every now and then. But if I ask you for 10 or 15%, or you offer 10 or 15%, I'm going to use you, and you're going to benefit as much as I am. Where we really need the PhDs and where you're going to need the PhDs to help you sometimes is on significance and impact. A lot of times the PhDs are a hammer looking for a nail, okay? And we need the significance and impact because these days, those are the sections on the grants that get the most points and the most weight. And a lot of times we simply don't have any idea what the clinical significance and impact is. We can quickly review the literature and make something up, but it really is your input that we need. We're also going to need your help with human subjects and IRB if we're involved in imaging. PCORI is an interesting opportunity for grants. And I've reviewed for them, and there have been a few radiology ones. That's where we would need the radiologists as well, and that's where good collaboration can exist because we don't have that patient angle, and we don't have the patient connections. So that's also a very good place and mechanism to get involved. Again, communicate, communicate, communicate. Attend virtually as much as you can, Zoom, GoToMeeting. I mean, there's so many opportunities now to get involved without leaving your office. Help promote. Once those results are out, once you've been involved in a research project, volunteer to present it at a different meeting, okay? A lot of the PhDs are going to go to SPIE, they're going to go to AAPM, they're going to go to the IEEE meetings. They're not going to come to AUR. They're not going to go to RSNA. They're not going to go to Röntgen Ray. Offer to present the results at the clinical conferences. There is no rule against presenting the same research from different angles to different audiences. Present it, the PhD at SPIE, here's all the algorithms, put up all the equations. You guys come here to these types of meetings and present. This is what it all really means, and this is how we can have an impact. So volunteer to help promote those results as well. So again, communicate and get involved, and I really think that you can do a lot with collaborating with PhDs. Thank you.
I think we have time for one question, if someone has. Otherwise, I have one for you, if not. That was really wonderful. One of the things that I know in our department, oftentimes PhDs are asked to do is to help MDs who are starting out. And, as we heard from Kevin, it's tough sometimes starting out with pre-reviewing grants. Do you think that's helpful? Should the MDs in the room, before they submit that grant, find some PhDs who actually know how to do it? To ask them, and if so, what kind of reward or recognition do the PhDs do for the hours of help they give?
Well, we give Snickers bars back. No, it goes both ways. Yes, absolutely. Having a PhD review your grant is absolutely useful. One, because we will have the different perspective. We're more often to have been on a review committee, so we know what they're looking for. But it also goes the other way, too. You can offer to review their grants. And to some extent, I would think that would be much more important because that helps you start to understand that whole significance and impact section to really see how things are written. So I think it goes both ways, and both are equally important. Okay.
Thank you. Good. So we'll move on to our next speaker now. I'd like to introduce Dr. Ronald Pishak from UT Southwestern. Again, he's a professor of radiology, although he's a cardiologist. And I believe he's also he's also an assistant dean. And as Reed was saying earlier, getting the intersection of different disciplines is a great place for Spark. And here we have someone who's intersected within his own department in two different disciplines. So,
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for coming. Again, I think that this is going to be a little bit different. I think all of the talks have just been wonderful in terms of these were all the same issues that came up as my career has developed, and I would have appreciated getting all this information when I started. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about is that in this sense of collaboration, there's a growing importance of imaging informatics to facilitate radiology research. And so what I would talk about is why imaging informatics, why now, how it can play an increasing role, and how we can ensure the radiologists have all the tools and skills to take advantage of it. And this is kind of my simplistic way about, I have the passion, you have the passion, you want to do this. I mean, what are the steps that you can go through? And this is simplistic, but the point is you have an inspiration, you need to design the study in some way that it can be done, you need to execute it, you have to do the analysis, you have to communicate it, and then obviously collaborate, and this is an endless cycle in terms of leading you to the next project. And today, these kind of things are very much supported by informatics, databases, searches, a variety of tools that all of your institutions are putting in place, and not just for radiology, but for everyone. And again, the clinical insights that you have in the reading room, how do we capture those in such a way that they then lead to projects? How do you actually determine that the study you're proposing can be done? Do you have the patient population that's necessary? Then when you actually do the project, how do you make sure that all of the constituent pieces are in place and that happens in a easy way for you and your collaborators? Then clearly on the analysis now, quantitative imaging is critical, but increasingly, and this is not just in radiology, but data mining to pull other information out of our electronic data sources. Then data visualization, and from a collaborative standpoint, the growth, extraordinary growth in registries that's now possible, and in research imaging networks. And I always have to show this slide because one of my colleagues, an abdominal radiologist, Travis Browning, always announces when he comes in a room that informatics is not IT, okay? It is not what kind of computer should I buy, okay? It's this idea of taking biomedical data, knowledge, and information for scientific inquiry and decision making. And as you know, there's a Medical Informatics Association which actually addresses that. And clearly the American College of Cardiology realizes this critical role. And don't forget that radiologists have really been long been leaders in clinical informatics. And the important thing is that they remain so. So how can this facilitate your research? Well, again, feasibility assessment, recruitment, outcomes in comparative effectiveness research, and population-based studies. And I won't go into these in all detail, but increasingly at most medical centers through the CTSA program and other programs, people are building clinical research data warehouses. And these take data out of existing clinical systems, anonymize them, a variety of other things, integrate them in such a way that then one can do queries to identify cohorts and actually detail eventually even patients that could participate in a study. And so these can be linked in addition to tissue banks, tumor registries, a variety of other tools that now can help facilitate your project. And these are not small databases. This is just a snapshot of a database that we use now that, again, this is not all the data that's in it, but you're talking about many millions of pieces of information. Okay? Now, whether they're all useful to you, that's another matter. But on the other hand, one of the things that's actually interesting here is radiology reports aren't presently in this. And in fact, we're in discussions right now to put radiology reports into this database, which will now make it available to everyone. So it's a great opportunity for us to get ahead of the curve on this. Now, people term this a secondary use of clinical data, and there are many proposed advantages that, again, you have more subjects, potential for greater statistical significance, likelihood of clinical relevance because you're not having a very precisely selected population for the study, and then potential for a larger scope of information. And the idea is that you can pick up rare signals. And I must say I went to a meeting where someone actually said that clinical research is dead. This is the only way you'll do research in the future, which I don't believe, but it is a viewpoint that's out there. Now, the disadvantages are, of course, the data quality is always an issue. There's inconsistent collection, narrative versus structured. To be honest, radiology is way ahead of other disciplines, I think, in terms of having structured information increasingly in reports, and this is a very important effort. Frankly, the clinical context is not always clear. The example I always use is a blood pressure measured in the hospital when the patient is terribly ill may not have the same significance as the blood pressure when they're coming to a routine clinic visit. So you do have to have the context of these measurements. And again, variations in style, and it frequently requires clinical and informatics experts to facilitate the extraction. And this is a key role for, I believe, for the radiologist in as these kind of studies grow, and they are growing, that the radiologist's information is interpreted correctly. But here's just an example. There was data from a mouse model that showed that breast cancer rise in a hyperglycemic environment is biologically distinct. By going against these databases, you were able to identify the number of breast cancer patients who had diabetes, and then determine how many you had tissue samples on that you could pursue further. So again, to facilitate, getting at your basic research question. And let me say that we've been doing work, and many others now have been starting to actually tie these to the image data. So in this particular case, we were looking for patients with pulmonary hypertension, trying to identify that as a subgroup and use that for subsequent analysis. So these things are growing. Now, the other large area that many of these studies are focused on is actually quality improvement. And this is actually from a cardiology journal, I hate to say, but it does point out the fact that if you're looking at quality, you have obviously the factors you control, let's say in the imaging laboratory, but you also have many things that are actually outside of that. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges for radiology, is you now need to link to things outside of the radiology information, outside of the radiology information system, and outside of the image itself. And those connections are going to be very important as you go towards, let's say, looking at the actionable items in reports. And these are some studies that Dr. Browning and Seth Toomey did, where they were looking at the way that the radiologist communicated whether the patient had appendicitis or not, and whether the surgeon took action on that. Okay? And so this is the kind of study, as in these enormous databases that are growing now from the electronic medical record, that you can perform this type of study. And similarly, it allows you to link imaging and processes to outcomes. And this is just an example of a study that Dr. Browning did, where he was looking at the issue of the follow-up of incidental findings on abdominal CT. And basically, could he, A, determine why they weren't getting worked up quickly, and B, could he introduce an intervention that would actually change the time to diagnosis? And that's exactly what he did. And again, by using the data that's in the EHR plus data from the radiology report, he was able to dramatically decrease the time from to have the patient see a specialist, to come to a diagnosis, and come to effective therapy. So again, these are the kind of things which now you can tie to all of the activities that occur in radiology, and this is going to be key, I think. Now, Kevin mentioned the Dallas Heart Study, which is an example of, I mentioned the problem with clinical databases not necessarily having high quality data. It is possible, and at many institutions there are other large databases which have much better quality control. And for example, in this particular case, this is essentially 3,000 people. They've had extensive imaging for phenotyping, multimodality, and the study was originally funded to investigate determinants of cardiovascular disease. And what this turned out to be was really an extremely rich image database for imaging research. And the important thing is you didn't have to figure out how you were going to pay for all the blood draws, okay, and all of the genetic studies and all the, I'm sorry, go back on there. And all the other things you needed to do to correlate with your imaging findings. And so I think there are an increasing number of studies like this. There are various registries being created, national registries, let's say, in pediatric rheumatology, okay, in terms of trying to look at their various biologic interventions. And there's a whole list of these things which are growing, which all of those patients have imaging studies. And so that provides an opportunity to take advantage of that. And again, part of the design of this was really to make a database which was quite addressable by investigators. And I got to say, I think it's been pretty successful. We've done over 150 publications. The thing is, We've had first authors basically at all levels, junior faculty, resident, fellow, medical student. And the thing which I think is very interesting is it provides a template and a laboratory for research development, okay? Because when you have these databases, people can go in and explore, okay? And it doesn't cost them anything, so to speak. And by doing this, it's stimulated new projects, developed sub-projects, things along that line. And it's really provided the foundation for multiple individuals to pursue independent funding. And I think it illustrates the value of the radiologist's participation and collaboration in imaging studies, which might be driven by other specialties, okay? Because they will have imaging studies, but you can plug into this, as was mentioned earlier, and if you're a collaborator in those studies, you'll play an important role. And of course, obviously the American College of Radiology is pursuing these kinds of things. So in conclusion, I think that radiology research will increasingly require the use of imaging informatics. It'll allow researchers to leverage the extraordinary investment that hospital systems and or healthcare systems have made over the past decade. I mean, you know, literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And they would like to see us do something useful with it, I think. And then a key feature is that it allows you to link radiology image results and radiologists to other events in clinical care to look at comparative effectiveness and outcome, and that increasingly radiology and other specialties will use this to improve clinical processes, design interventions, and influence the patient outcome. So how should you use this to jumpstart your career? Well, I've become familiar with the informatic tools that are available in general in radiology, but also at your institution. Seek out the radiology informatician in your department. There always are some. Okay, they're kind of hidden under rocks and things like that. But the bottom line is there are people who are very interested, because they're the people who frequently told the hospital what to do to make the PACS system work, to make the ordering system work, things along that line. But they have significant interest in research, and they want to help you. And I think increasingly you're not going to be able to stay away from the EMR if that's, so you better jump in with both feet. And I got to say, we have several people now, one who's already certified as an informatician and informatics specialist. And this is occurring in other specialties. So I think this is one of the things that's on the horizon there where people who are interested in this area and in junior positions can make an important contribution. Thank you.
So that was terrific. We have time for a few questions, if anyone has one. Oh, perfect.
In a very nice talk. I just wanted to get a sense of for these registries, what type of funding you got to start a registry like this. What type of funding you needed?
I'm sorry, what kind?
The registries, Dallas Heart Study registry. You must have had funding to start that registry.
Yeah, we had foundation funding, okay, to start the project, okay, and we've continued to fund it as an institutional asset.
Okay, thanks.
That's a great question, Rotham. I have one more question, if I could, Ron. One of the things that used to happen is if industry created a neat imaging device remote from academia, they could sell it because the pictures were prettier, right? But now that they want to do rapid prototyping, this collaboration with academia is much more appealing. And big data seems like one draw. Can you talk about maybe that?
Yes, that's a good point. That we are collecting enormous amounts of information with these images. I mean, something as simple as the DICOM header, okay, that's on every single image we create. And if we can link that to other assessments of the interpretation quality by the radiologist, the degree of confidence the clinician has on the basis of those results, again, like I say, those things are out there that we could take advantage of.
There's a common theme I'd like you to realize. Perfect. I won't ask you back up. Thank you. With each one of these presenters, I'll go to Reed, for example, who was very self-effacing. He's a guy who's a professor in bioengineering, 2 NIH R01s. Kevin's talk, Elizabeth's. It's humility, right? How do you open the door to partnership? And I think being humble and being willing, I think, as Kevin suggested, to take on some tasks can open up doors to greater collaboration. So I think it's critical. Our next speaker is a wonderful example of being humble. She's been a big sister to me since I was a junior resident at Hopkins, and I got to watch her meteoric rise as she went to Pittsburgh, was a section chief, really a world leader in advanced imaging techniques in aging, dementia, Alzheimer's as well. She was section chief of neuro at Pitt. Then she went to Emory, served as associate dean for research, and then was asked to be chair. Just phenomenal. So it's really a pleasure to have Carolyn Meltzer come up and be our next speaker. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Norm. It's very special that two Hopkins colleagues are here today, and I'm delighted to be part of this session. I've learned a lot from the speakers who preceded me, and again, I also wish I had this kind of mentoring sessions when I was starting out. So I'm going to bring up the rear and talk about time and money, and the time-money continuum. In terms of disclosures, I have a lot of things I don't get paid for. So over the next 15 minutes, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by the time-money continuum, how to figure out as a new researcher what you need in terms of time and money, and then how to negotiate for it. So I think it's clear at our academic institutions, certainly every chair I meet is invested in the growth and development of our young professionals. So, I mean, for me, I think that's my number one job, is to make sure that the people I bring on in the department have every opportunity to do what they want to do. And for those science-aholics, as I guess Kevin might have called it, we need to be able to create opportunity. But there's a cost to that, and there's some real-world issues to talk about. So if you're starting out and you haven't picked your institution yet, it is important to go to the right institution based on some resonance with the area that you're interested in, a place that does have research infrastructure, and where there is support by your section head, by your chair, for the kinds of things you want to do. I started out in an area of PET imaging at a time when nobody quite knew what it was, and I interviewed at a place, and the chair said, "I don't think this PET stuff is going to pan out, but if you want to come here, we'll give you a job." So I thought, that's not going to work very well. Mentorship, I think we've heard all about the importance of mentorship and having a mosaic mentorship panel to choose from. Again, both inside and outside the department, as the point was made. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on these two issues. You need the time to do research, and you may need the money to do it. And that may be in different forms, whether it's support for your time. So we're talking about the realities of that. So what do I need to get started? I had a talk with a resident today from another program and thinking about jobs, and she said, well, I heard that it's best to start out, if you want to do research, it's best to start out at 100% clinical and then show that you're a team player and then do research. So there's lots of different things that I think we hear in the ether. And I had a very different point of view for that individual. So first is the type of research that you want to do or that you're engaged in. Is it wet lab work? Do you need long dedicated hours to do experiments? Is it data intensive? such that you're working on a computer and running spreadsheets and doing data integration, and that has a little more flexibility to it, where you might be able to do it after hours, you might be able to do it if there are bits and pieces of time. I know sometimes the associate deans for research go through labs and they wonder why they're completely empty during the day. And that's because a lot of people are doing their experiments in the evening, and the grad students are at Starbucks, which is where you can find them, working on their laptops doing data. It also suggests that the offices associated with the laboratory space are not as comfortable, and the coffee's worse. And what is your experience level? So is it that to do the research you want to do, you're going to have to get some additional training? And then if that's so, then you need to think about having the time to do that. There may be career development awards or programs are associated with your institutional CTSA that offer masters in clinical research, because you really need to delve into clinical trial design and understand that, and you don't have that experience? Or is it something where you can learn by being part of a team where people bring different things to the table and learn it along the way and fill in those gaps? So how big are those gaps? And that's something that your mentors can help you with as well. The cost of preliminary data. So if you need a piece of equipment that's not at your institution, that's quite costly. If you need human PET imaging research with odd ligands, that can be very costly, as opposed to some other projects that may be based on clinical data, retrospective design, analyzing Medicare databases. So what is the cost of that data that you need? And that will determine if you're looking at a grant that gives you more time, but you don't have the money to get the data, that's not going to be helpful, because you have more time to just think great thoughts, but not actually do the experiment. And the type of clinical work you do. So, there used to be a time when there was some flexibility in radiology. I'm not sure there is much anywhere in the clinical realm, but certainly some areas may be more challenging if you're in an area where there's a big call burden, interventional radiology where the days may be very long. That will determine the kind of release time from clinical work that you need. So when you're asking for your academic time, you think about asking for what those, what percentage that should be, what's the norm at your institution, so that most places there's, 80% clinical, 20% academic, but patient always comes first, so sometimes if a division is shorthanded, you might lose some of that academic time unless it's protected. So if you need more, then is it what would be your expectations for that? Would it be 40%, and then what's tied to that? Can I buy more? And try to understand the culture of that. Are there a lot of people who are getting more time, or are you going to be the first clinician to ask for it? So I know sometimes what is a normal week is up for debate. So when you go to ask your chair for time or money, you need to know what the price of each is. So it used to be that there was a lot of flexibility, and there's lots of margin on the clinical side to support. Sure, take an extra day. Our systems are becoming so busy clinically and so efficient clinically that the amount of work covered and taking someone out of that system, there isn't a lot of fat anymore. Also with the cuts to reimbursement, there isn't a lot of margin anymore. So the internally funded research is getting tougher and tougher. So this is something I don't really like to talk about so much, and that's the balance of research funding. I don't want to discourage my faculty, my residents from being interested in research, because that's what I want them to do. And they think, well, if I get a grant, it'll bring in money, and that'll be great. The problem is research requires a lot of money. It requires a lot of investment. And the equation is skewed such that what it requires and what it brings in aren't the same. So for every grant someone brings in, there's a higher cost that goes with it in terms of the investment. So what does research not support? What are all those other things? It's the preliminary data to get the grants, or the unfunded part of the work. Now more so for PhDs, but also for some clinician investigators, there may be some things that are needed ahead of time. So startup packages may be needed at the beginning, and that is a research investment on the part of the department. So it's something your chair is going to be worried about. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but the unsupported portion of salaries for the time you dedicate to research if you are a clinician, that cost share portion. Most of the equipment that's used for research is not supported on grants. Desktop computers that you may want the super duper model because you're going to do your clinical research on it. You can't usually fund that through a grant except in unique circumstances. And that gap between the NIH indirect dollars and the blended rate, I wouldn't worry about that. We're only going to talk about direct dollars today for the most part. So there is for most of grant funding, which is at the federal level, and to some extent in some foundation grants as well, there's a cap to what's funded. And that cap has taken a hit over the last few years. So it used to be that at NIH, salaries were funded. If you were 100% funded on through NIH grants, the department would be reimbursed $200,000 for your salary, and that's been moved down to essentially $180,000. How many radiologists full-time are working for $180,000? So let's figure out what that means. So say you're junior faculty and you want to get a K award. And I'm a big believer in K awards because that is what jump-started my own career, having the opportunity to have a lot of time allotted by the K award and the increased training for, in my case, the many gap areas that I needed to fill before I could do what I wanted to do in research. So salaries differ all over the place, but let's look at a standard. Let's look at the AAMC 50th percentile for an assistant professor, and that's around $325K. The required commitment for a K award is 75% time, which is a lot of time. So 100% of your effort as a radiologist, 75% of that will go toward the research. The real cost of that, 100% is $325. The NIH payment is about $180K. For 75% of that, costs the department $244,000. The NIH will not even pay at the cap for a K award. They pay around $100,000. It's a special K award cap, in my mind. So the cost share for the department every year is the difference is $144,000 or $715,000 over the 5 years of the grant, and that doesn't include if your 75% of your time is going to a grant, then they probably need to hire another radiologist for your division, which is going to be another $325K. So the cost is enormous, and it's important to bear that in mind, because I don't think there's the flexibility as much to support these kinds of efforts. I always pray that I have just one at a time in terms of faculty who are successful in K awards, which is a terrible thing and leaves me conflicted. I think when you're thinking about what you need and we want to ask your chair for it, please understand that weekends count as time for your research. So, you know, and it may be a generational thing, but when you tell your chair, oh, I haven't written a lot of papers because I haven't had the academic time, they say, well, what are you doing with your 20% academic time? And they say, well, you know, I do some things, but, you know, I really want to make sure that my weekends are for my family, and that's my number one priority. And it should be your number one priority, but I think if you're negotiating, spending a little bit of time, of your own time and your own skin in the game is important. At this stage of my career, I still spend a lot of time on my weekends doing my academic work. So I do expect others to think about that as well. You got to make it a compelling case for what you're going to accomplish with whatever it is you do ask for. So that conversation is critical. So you may be thinking, you can see I'm going to do great things. I'm going to win the Nobel Prize. I've just got these great ideas. And your chair may be thinking, well, there's going to be a lot of a giant sucking sound, and I want to make sure that this investment, which I can't do for every faculty member, is going to be a good one. And folks aren't going to say, look, you know, Meltzer gave so-and-so all this time, and they wrote 2 papers and haven't gotten a grant. And so you got to be willing to, so actually, and I had a very talented individual want to have a K award, and I said, you know, is that the right thing for you at this stage? And we had a discussion about it, and you know, I said, here's the equation of what it would be, and we have to make sure this is the right investment for you and for the department. And she said, well, I'm going to cure colon cancer, so of course $1 million is nothing. And that was compelling in the philosophical sense, but I wasn't sure that was really going to fly in the business sense. So you have to think of it a little bit as a negotiation in which you're willing to compromise and you're willing to have deliverables. So if, so I know sometimes, you know, the choices to you seem early in your career, and early in my career, it's like, if I don't get support, I'm out of here. I'm never going to get funded. I'm not meant for this. But really being able to think about, well, what if I get this in terms of, you know, I need preliminary data to apply for this grant. I need some internal seed money. I need you to sponsor me for a foundation award, and I realize that's a cost to the department, but here's what this particular foundation award is going to do for me in terms of training, in terms of time, in terms of money, and here's what I want to accomplish. So often what we do is say, okay, you know, you need another day a week, 40% time. Let's do that for 2 years, and then we expect that other day to be funded. Or we may say, well, you know, here's some opportunities for seed grants. We'll match. We'll do something. We'll help you get there. So be clear about the goals. And to get what you need, say you get the 40%, don't wait for the 2-year mark. Keep your chair informed of what you're doing. My favorite emails to get is not, you know, a scanner just quenched, or we lost money on this budget, but it's when a faculty member emails me and says, I wanted you to know this paper's coming out. I'm really excited. Or, you know, I was asked to be on this panel because I'm recognized now for starting to be an expert in this area. So rejoice in that. I know it means sometimes tooting your own horn. We certainly like to hear it when you do. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I won't ask for money.
Yeah, cool question. So we have time for a couple questions. Any from the audience? Dr. Meltzer? Srini?
So I just had a comment. I wanted to comment on Dr. Meltzer's talk. In full disclosure, she's my chair, so I might be washing some dirty linen in public. So. But I think one of the things that's important, I was supported through a K, and when I started it was a KL2 through the ACT-C, I quickly found I was spending a lot of my time just taking the classes, doing the courses, and I wasn't really getting things published. And I stepped back and I thought about it, and I said, you know, more than my time, for me, what would have been valuable was a postdoc support in the lab to do many of the things that I couldn't be doing when I was in these classes. And then that brings me to the second comment that I wanted to make was it's never too late to get a startup package. I talked to some people around the country and said, hey, I think I need to get a startup package. What do I do? And I had people laughing at me, hey, you get to be bright only once, and you lost your chance, buddy. And that's not true, at least in the department that I'm in. I think and that the discussion today was very clearly about that. How do you negotiate? It's an ongoing thing, and it's not something you do just before you get a job. It's something that you do your entire life. And in my case, again, I worked with the vice chair of research who's retired now, but he made me write a proposal. It's nice to have some things put down on paper. This is what I need. This is what I can do with it. This is what I did with the prior resources that I had. I think if you have that plan, it makes it easier to make that negotiation. So that's what I wanted to share my experience.
Okay. Well, I guess that wasn't exactly a question. That was a good way, but it did use up the question time. So I appreciate it. So I think in closing, I just want to make a couple of comments. I think our talk, all of our speakers today were right on the money, right on the time. I guess both, since it's a continuum. And it was really great. I think it was Kevin, actually several people talked about luck. And I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who said, I believe a lot about luck, and the harder I work, the luckier I get. And in fact, it really is true. Those people who are successful often are very lucky. I know in my own career, a lot of times, luck came into play. But typically, the persistence, the harder the more passion you bring to it, the higher the likelihood you're going to be one of those lucky people who actually, does make it and is going to be up here in 5 years giving these talks. It's something that the more you do, the more passionate many of us feel about research. So it's something, if you're just starting off your careers, if you're in the audience, it's definitely worth doing, because there's nothing you'll love more than really contributing to science and the field. So with that, again, I'd like everyone to join me in thanking our speakers. And I want to thank Norm Beauchamp, my co-moderator, as well. Thank you all very much.